Om Shri Sai Ram. Good morning, perfect English students. We have a sunny day this morning and we're going to study chapter 5, which is called A Sunny Morning. This story, this play, was written in the fall, and it takes place in the fall in Madrid. And it is written by the Quintero brothers when they were only 16 and 18 years old. Before we get into the play, I'd like to do the pre-reading activity. And that activity is how does it feel when you meet a friend after a long time? We all have this experience. We have an old friend from grammar school or an old relative, and after 5 years or 4 years or 3 years, they come back into your life. And a good friend, you'll pick up right where you left off. It's a wonderful feeling when you connect again in your heart. The next question in our pre-reading activity is, why do some relationships come to an end? Life is very interesting. Some people get together for a day or for a weekend or for a week or for a year, but then all of a sudden you don't see them again. Some close relationships will end for a number of reasons. They can pass away, their parents move out of town, they move, they get a job, and you don't see them. So the bottom line is, treat everybody, all of your friends, as good friends on that day and enjoy the period that you're with them. So the Quintero brothers, they started writing plays when they were very young. In fact, they've written over 200 plays and skits, most to do with Spain, where they were from. And this one takes place, in Madrid. And it's a story in the autumn. And the autumn, of course, is when the leaves are falling, everything has been harvested, and the days are getting shorter. But this is a sunny morning in the autumn. And these two people get together. The names are Donna Laura and Don Gonzalo. In Spain, Donna means miss and Don means mister. And they're a little more formal in Spain, especially in 1889 when this play was written. So we'll use those words to identify the actors. And the whole play takes place in a park, near a park bench. And the two main actors are Donna Laura and Don Gonzalo. And they are about 70 years of age. But they used to be lovers when they were about 20 years of age. So 50 years has gone by. So at first, Donna Laura, and you can see from this picture, looks older. She has her hat on, dressed nicely. And she comes into the park with her maid. And her maid's name is Petra. So I'm going to read the story so you understand the pronunciation. And then we'll answer questions, and I'll give you some insights into what is really going on. So the sunny morning in a retired park in Madrid. Retired means an older park. It's been around for a while. And Donna Laura is very handsome. She has whitish silver hair, bright eyes, and you can see that she's sharp, even though she's older. And when she comes into the park, she needs the help of Petra, because she's not walking so well. And Donna Laura says, "I am so glad to be here. I feared my seat would be occupied. What a beautiful morning." It was a great morning. And there were a lot of people there at the park because it was so nice. Petra, her maid, said, "The sun is hot." Now, Donna Laura says, "Yes, you are only 20. So then Donna Laura sits on the bench. And she says, "Oh, I feel more tired than usual." And then Petra, she's looking at Petra. "Petra, you seem impatient. Go, if you wish to go chat with your guard." It's interesting in this play, Petra is interested in the guard, and Juanito, the servant of Gonzalo, is interested in all the nursemaids. And Donna Laura and Don Gonzalo, everybody's interested in the other sex. They're interested in relationships. So because the Quintero brothers were 16 and 18 when they wrote this play, You can see that's what they were thinking about also. But they were trying to express it in a humorous, nice way. So this play turns out to be a comedy with a slightly tragic ending. So Donna Laura says, go see your guard if you want to go see him. And then Petra says, she's trying to be cool. She goes, he's not my guard, he belongs to the park. And Donna Laura said, he belongs to you more than he belongs to the park. Go find him, but remain within calling distance. Petra says, I see him over there, waiting for me. Donna Laura says, do not remain more than 10 minutes. Very well, Senora, and Petra leaves. And then all of a sudden, Donna Laura says, wait a minute. And Petra says, what does the Senora wish? And she says, give me my breadcrumbs. And then Petra says, I do not know what is the matter with me. And Donna Laura smiles and said, I do. Your head is where your heart is, with the guard. Petra said, here, Senor, and gave the breadcrumbs to Donna Laura. And then she goes to be with the guard. Donna Laura waves goodbye, adios. And then she looks at all these birds that are coming to her, and she goes, here they come, here they come. And with a free hand, she starts, she has already carried her parasol. With a free hand, she gets the breadcrumbs, okay, and then she goes, she takes the breadcrumbs and she says, they know just when to expect me, okay? And she says, these are for the spryest, the birds that are very clever, okay, and very quick, okay? And then she goes, these are for the gluttons. Now there's some big birds that run in and try to push the little birds away, okay? And then she goes and says, these are for the little ones who are the most persistent. Some of the birds just stay there and they're very persistent. And the big one is always there first. She knows him because of the big head. And now another one, and now another two, they all come. They all seem to know. And then she says to them, don't worry, don't worry. There's plenty of breadcrumbs. I'll bring you more tomorrow. One bird picks up a breadcrumb and flies into the tree, and she calls him the philosopher. Now, at this point, when the birds are feeding in front of her, eating from her hand, in comes Don Gonzalo and Juanito. And they're shuffling along, okay, and creating dust. And Don Gonzalo, he's old, he's about 70 years old. He's gouty, all right? Gouty means he's eaten a lot of rich food. And his joints are very painful because he's eaten too much high food and not enough fresh vegetables and sprouts. And he's got a little bit of arthritis and he's gouty. So he's a little impatient. He's older now. So he looks towards his bench, okay, and he sees his bench has 3 priests sitting there. So he says, idling away their time. They should be saying Mass. This is what priests usually do. They're saying Mass and blessing people. But here the 3 priests are on his bench. He thinks it's his bench. So Juanito, his servant, who's helping Don Gonzalo walk, said, you can sit here, sir. There's only one lady. This is the lady right next to Donna Laura. And he says, no, I want my own bench, you know. So he says, root those priests out of my bench. Well, you can't kick people out of a park bench, you know. So Juanito goes over there, sees the priests are busy talking, and he comes back. And he says they won't leave. And so Don Gonzalo, he's not happy. He says, let's walk over this way. So he walks over this way, walks back, and he comes back to the same bench where Donna Laura is. And he said, just as if they were glued to the seats, come this way, Juanito. And then as he's walking, he kicks all the breadcrumbs and the birds, and Donna Laura says, look out, indignantly. She's not happy that he's chasing away the birds. And so Don Gonzalo says, are you speaking to me, madam? Yes, to you. And then Don Gonzalo's a gentleman. He says, what do you wish? And she says, you've scared away my birds. And Don Gonzalo says, what do I care about birds? And Donna Laura says, but I care about the birds. She's very, very sensitive and in touch with nature. And Don Gonzalo says, this is a public park. And so Donna Laura says, why do you complain? Because she overheard the conversation between Juanito and Don Gonzalo about the priest being on his bench. And she says, why do you complain about priests being on your bench? And then Don Gonzalo is a little bit egoistic. He says, Senora, we have not met, okay? You do not take the liberty of addressing me. And then he walks away. He said, come, Juanito. And he walks away towards the other side. So Donna Laura says, what an ill-natured old man. Why must certain people get so fussy and cross when they reach a certain age? I am glad he lost that bench. Serves him right for scaring the birds. He is furious. Yes, she's watching him, okay? Just find a seat if you can, poor man. He wipes the perspiration from his face. Here he comes. A carriage would not raise more dust because he's shuffling his feet. He's just shuffling along. So, have the priests gone? He's talking to Juanito. And Juanito says, no, the priests have not gone. He says, well, the authorities should put more benches for these beautiful sunny days. Many people want to sit down, and I want to have my own bench, okay? Well, I guess I must sit here. It's the only space. I'll sit in here next to the old lady, okay? And then as he sits down, because he's a gentleman, he touches his hat and he greets her. Good morning. Now, Donna Laura has just seen him kick up all his dust and scare away the birds and kick her crumbs. And she goes, what, you here again? And he goes, I repeat, we have not met. And so Donna Laura says, I was responding to your salute. And then Don Gonzalo, a little bit of ego, says, good morning should be your answer, okay? And that's all you should have said. And Donna Laura's a little bit cheeky, and she goes, well, you should have asked to even sit down at this bench. This is my bench, okay? And Don Gonzalo said, the benches here are public property. And then Donna Laura says, why do you say the priests have yours? Don Gonzalo, he's thinking, well, okay, she caught me on that one, okay? But I have nothing more to say. And then he says between his teeth, okay? He goes, senile old lady, she ought to be home knitting and counting beads. Now, Donna Laura has got good hearing. She can hear this, okay? And she goes, don't grumble anymore. I will not leave just to please you. So then Don Gonzalo takes his handkerchief and he starts brushing his shoes because it's very dusty in this park. And he's brushing his shoes, trying to clean the dust off. And she says to him, do you use your handkerchief as a shoe brush? And he's startled, you know? And he goes, why not? And she goes, do you use your shoe brush as a handkerchief? And Don Gonzalo is not happy that she's saying all these things to him. So he goes, what right do you have to criticize my actions? And then Donna Laura says very sweetly, a neighbor's right. A neighbor can help the next neighbor. That's a good neighbor policy. But Don Gonzalo doesn't want to hear this, okay? He says to Juanito, Juanito, my book, I do not care to listen to this nonsense. But he's on the same bench as her, so they have to get along a little bit. Donna Laura looks over and says, sarcastically, she goes, you are very polite. And Don Gonzalo says, pardon me, senora, but I never interfere. You should never interfere with things that do not concern you. And Donna Laura says, I say what I think. And Don Gonzalo says, more to the same effect. Give me the book, Juanito. So Juanito hands the book over to Don Gonzalo. Now Don Gonzalo puts on a pair of glasses. You can see these big, thick glasses that Don Gonzalo has. And then he takes out a big magnifying glass, all right, to read the book. And she's looking at all of this. So she can't resist saying something. She goes, "I thought you were taking out a telescope." And Don Gonzalo, who's got all this stuff on him, says, "Was that you?" And so she goes, "Your sight must be keen." She's making a sarcastic comment. And he goes, because he's a man and he's got a little bit of ego, he says, "Keener than yours is." Don Laura says, "Yes, evidently. I don't have glasses. I'm not using a magnifying glass." And then Don Gonzalo, to protect his image, okay, his ego, says, "Ask the hares and the partridges." Hares are big rabbits that they hunt, okay, especially in Spain and in Europe. There's big rabbits. And partridges are like pheasants, and they hunt those too for food. So Donna Laura says, after Don Gonzalo says hares and partridges, she goes, "Ah, do you hunt?" And Don Gonzalo says, "I did, and even now." And Don Laura says, "Oh, yes, of course." Don Gonzalo is a little bit affected by that. He says, "Yes, Senora. Every Sunday, I take my gun and my dog, you understand, and go to one of my estates near Aravaca, and I kill time." So Donna Laura, very clever lady, says, "Oh yes, kill time. That is all you kill. You're not killing any pheasants or hares." And then Don Gonzalo says, "Do you think so?" He's getting a little mad about this. "I could show you a wild boar's head in my study." So Donna Laura, who's not to be outdone, says, "Yes, and I could show you a tiger skin in my boudoir. What does that prove?" So at this point, Don Gonzalo says, "Very well, Senor. Please allow me to read. Enough conversation." And she says, "Well, you subside then." And then he thinks, "Okay, I'll subside." And then he reaches in his pocket and gets out a snuff box. You can see this snuff box that he gets out. And he puts a little bit on his hand. And then he says, "But first I will take a pinch of snuff." And then because he's polite, he says, "Will you have some?" And she goes, "If it is good, okay. If it is good, it is some of the finest." So he offers her some. And they take the snuff. And the snuff is a tobacco form, ground up very fine. And people take it and they sniff it. Your nose has a lot of microcapillaries in it. So when you sniff the tobacco, the nicotine comes in and it's exciting. It gives you a little bit of energy. And at the time this was written in 1889, a lot of people would use this snuff, especially in Spain. And so she goes, "It clears my head." And then Don Gonzalo says, "And mine." And then Donna Laura looks at him after she's taken the snuff and said, "Do you sneeze?" And he goes, "Yes, Senora, 3 times." And then Donna Laura says, "That's what I do too." So she starts sneezing, and then he sneezes, and then she sneezes, and he sneezes. They go back and forth 3 times. So Donna Laura says, "What a coincidence. After taking the snuff, they await for the sneeze, and they both sneeze alternately 3 times. Don Gonzalo says, there, I feel better." And Donna Laura says, "So do I." And then you'll see in your book, there's an aside. An aside is a conversation that takes place between the actor and the audience. And the conversation is hidden away from the other actors. So it's a technique. It's a literary tool that authors use in plays to get the audience to feel more connected with one or more of the actors. So at this point, Donna Laura says to the audience, okay, "This snuff," she goes, "this snuff has made peace between us." And she doesn't say that to him, she says that to the audience. And then Don Gonzalo says to her, "Will you excuse me if I read aloud?" Donna Laura is in a better mood now, okay, now that they're a little more friendly. She goes, "Read as loud as you please. You will not disturb me." So Don Gonzalo takes his book with his glasses and his magnifying glass, and he reads, "All love is sad, but sad as it is the best thing that we know. That is from Campo Amor." And Donna Laura says, "Ah, she's enjoying the poetry." Then Don Gonzalo goes further. "The daughters of the mothers I once loved kiss me now as they would a graven image." A graven image, you know what graves are. That's where we bury people. And they put a headstone. And they put the name of the person who's died. And people will come, they'll kiss the stone like they're kissing the... But they do it in a very holy way. Not a passionate way. But like you would kiss a father from the church or something. In a very spiritual way. And so he says those lines, I take it in a humorous vein, okay? Because these girls aren't kissing him because they like him. He's an old guy. And he starts laughing. And she laughs too. She goes, "I take those words too as that way." Then Don Gonzalo, he's encouraged because she's enjoying the poetry. He goes, "There are some beautiful poems in this book. Here," he opens to a page. "20 years pass. He returns." Boom, all of a sudden, Donna Laura says, "You cannot imagine how it affects me to see you reading with all of those glasses." She's just amazed that he has to use this magnifying glass and all these glasses just to see the book. And Don Gonzalo is a little bit shocked and says, "Can you read without any?" And Donna Laura says, "Certainly." And then Don Gonzalo says, "At your age," he can see that she's older, okay? "You're jesting." Donna Laura says, "Pass me the book," okay? So she takes the book, okay? And she takes the book and says, 20 years pass, he returns, and each beholding the other exclaims, "Can it be that this is he? Heavens, is it she?" And then Donna Laura returns the book to Don Gonzalo. So this poem is very important because the poem shows that after 20 years, these two people met each other. And they were amazed at 20 years, they could hardly believe that this was the other man, and the girl could hardly believe it was the man, and the man could hardly believe it was the same girl after 20 years. Now in this play that we're studying right now, they've been apart for 50 years. So you can see they didn't recognize each other when they first came. So Don Gonzalo says after he gets the book back, "Wow, indeed, I envy your wonderful eyesight." And then Donna Laura does an aside, and she goes, "I know every line by heart." So she couldn't read the book, but she knew every line by heart. And now the audience, which is you and me, okay, we understand that she's fooling Don Gonzalo, okay? Don Gonzalo, he hears that, and he's thinking, boy, she has good eyesight. But he wants to recover now, and he says, "I am very fond of good verses, very fond. Even I composed some in my youth." And she's thinking, good ones? And he goes, "Of all kinds. I was a great friend of Esperancita, Zorilla, Becker, and others. I first met Zorilla in America." And she goes, "Why, you have been in America?" And Don Gonzalo says, "Several times. The first time I went, I was only 6 years old." And she said, "You must have gone with Columbus in one of his caravels." Ha ha ha, he starts laughing. "Not quite as bad as that. I admit I am old, but I did not know Ferdinand and Isabella." Ferdinand and Isabella were the king and queen of Spain, and they sent Columbus in 1492 to discover America. And this is 400 years later. They both laugh. "I was also a great friend of Campo Amor. I met him in Valencia. I am a native of that city. So she goes, "You are?" Then he goes further. He says, "Yes, I was brought up there, and I spent my youth there. Have you ever visited that city?" Donna Laura says, "Yes, senor. Not far from Valencia, there was a villa that, if still there, should retain memories of me. I spent several seasons there. It was many years ago. It was near the sea, hidden among the lemon and orange tree. They called it, let me see, what did they call it? Marisela." And then Don Gonzalo goes, "Marisela?" So they look at each other, because Marisela is where they had met each other before. Then Donna Laura recovers herself and she goes, "Marisela, is that name familiar to you?" And Don Gonzalo responds, "Yes, very familiar. If my memory serves me right, for we forget as we grow old, there lived in that villa the most beautiful woman I have ever seen. And I assure you I have seen many. Let me see, what was her name? What was her name? Laura, 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 Laura Lorente." All of a sudden, Laura says, startled, "Laura Lorente?" They look at each other. Don Gonzalo says, "Yes." Donna Laura recovers herself and she says, "Nothing. You reminded me of my best friend." Don Gonzalo says, "How strange." Donna Laura says, "It is strange. She was called the Silver Maiden." So he says, Don Gonzalo says, "Precisely. The Silver Maiden. By that name she was known in that locality. I seem to see her as if she were before me now, at the window with red roses. Do you remember that window?" Donna Laura said, "Yes, I remember that window. It was the window of her room." Don Gonzalo said, "She spent many hours there. I mean, in my day." And Donna Laura, she sighs, "In mine too." Don Gonzalo, now he says, "She was ideal, fair as a lily, jet black hair and black eyes, with an uncommonly sweet expression. She seemed to cast a radiance wherever she was. Her figure was perfect, beautiful. What forms of sovereign beauty God models in human clay. She was a dream." So now at this point, Donna Laura gives an aside to the people. She goes, "If you but knew that dream was now by your side, you would realize what dreams come to." She looks at Don Gonzalo and says, "She was very unfortunate and had a sad love affair." He said, "Very sad." They look at each other again. Donna Laura said, "Did you hear of it?" "Did you hear of it?" "Yes." Donna Laura, "The waves of Providence are strange." She goes, "This is Gonzalo," talking at an aside. Don Gonzalo says, "The gallant lover in the same affair." Donna Laura says, "And the duel?" Don Gonzalo, "Precisely, the duel. The gallant lover was," now he's trying to figure out what to say. He goes, "was my cousin, of whom I was very fond." He's covering up because he looks a lot older. You remember the picture, how old he looked. So, it was my cousin. "Oh, yes," she says. "Oh, yes, a cousin. My friend told me in one of her letters the story of that affair, which was truly romantic. He, your cousin, passed by on horseback every morning down the rose path under her window and tossed up to her balcony a bouquet of flowers, which she caught." Don Gonzalo, "And later in the afternoon, the gallant horseman would return on horseback and come on the same path and would catch the bouquet of flowers that she would toss to him. Am I right? She goes, yes. They wanted to marry her to a merchant that she would not have. Her parents had tried to arrange a marriage for her, but she loved Gonzalo at that point. And then Don Gonzalo says, and one night, when my cousin was under her window, waiting for her to sing, the other person presented himself unexpectedly. The rich merchant came. And then Don Laura says, and he insulted your cousin. Don Gonzalo says, yes, and there was a quarrel. And Don Laura says, and later a duel. Don Gonzalo said, yes, at sunrise on the beach, and the merchant was badly wounded. They had gotten into a sword fight, and the merchant was badly wounded. So my cousin, had to run, had to conceal himself, and later to fly. So actually, Gonzalo should have stayed there. It was a duel, it was an honorable duel, but he ran away because this man was rich, and he was afraid something would happen to him. So, you seem to know the story well, is what Don Laura says. And Don Gonzalo says, and so do you. Don Laura says, I have explained that my friend repeated it to me. And then Don Gonzalo said, as my cousin did to me. And then Don Gonzalo says, as an aside, this is Laura. He's talking to us. And Don Laura says, why tell him he does not suspect or expect me to be Donna Laura? Don Gonzalo says, he gives another aside. He's talking to the audience. She is entirely innocent. So Donna Laura says, and was it you, by any chance, who advised your cousin to forget Laura? Don Gonzalo says, why? My cousin never forgot her. Don Laura said, then how do you account for his conduct? Don Gonzalo said, I will tell you. Okay? The young man, meaning Don Gonzalo, because he's his cousin, took refuge in my house, fearful of the consequences of the duel. He was a little bit afraid because this merchant was highly regarded and had a lot of power in the community. From my home, he went to Seville, and then he went to Madrid. He wrote Laura many letters, some of them in poetry, in verse. But undoubtedly, they were intercepted by her parents, for she never answered them at all. Then, in despair, believing that his love was lost forever, he joined the army. Some people do that. They're so despondent and sad, they join the army for something to do. The army went down to Africa. They had a war, And in that war, he was in a trench, and he's fighting with these other people. And he met a glorious death. He was holding the flag of Spain, and he was gasping with his last breath the name of his lover, Laura, saying, Laura, Laura, I love you, I love you. And he passed away. Now, Donna Laura says, that is an atrocious lie. What an atrocious lie. Don Gonzalo, he says, I could not have killed myself more gloriously. So Donna Laura says to him, you must have been prostrated by the calamity, losing your cousin. And Don Gonzalo says, yes, indeed, senor. It was as if he were my brother. I presume, though, on the contrary, that Laura, in a short time, was chasing butterflies in the garden, indifferent to regret. Chasing butterflies means chasing other men, not thinking about Gonzalo anymore. Don Laura says, no, senor, no. Don Gonzalo says, it is a woman's way, one guy is gone, they find another one. Don Laura said, no, even if it were a woman's way, even if it were a woman's way, the Silver Maiden was not of that disposition. Disposition means that's not her character. She would never do that. She would not take a position like that. My friend, talking about herself, awaited news for days, months, a year, and no letter came. One afternoon, just at sunset, as the first stars were coming out, she was seen to leave the house, and with quickening steps, she went on her way to the beach, where her beloved had risked his life in a duel. She wrote his name on the sand, Gonzalo. And then she sat upon a rock right at the water's edge and fixed her gaze on the horizon, where the air meets the water, looking at the horizon as the tide was coming in. The waves murmured their eternal trinity. A trinity is a sad love song. And slowly the tide came in, crept up the rock, and with a boom, took her and swept her out to sea. Don Gonzalo says, good heavens. Don Laura said, the fishermen of that shore often tell this story, affirm it was a long time before the waves washed away the name written in the sand, Gonzalo. It stayed for a long time. Aside, you will not get ahead of me in decorating my own funeral. Don Gonzalo says, on a side, he goes, she lies worse than I do. Donna Laura says, poor Laura. Don Gonzalo says, poor Gonzalo. Donna Laura said, aside, I will not tell him that I married 2 years later. She went and got married 2 years later, but she's not going to tell Gonzalo. And Gonzalo said, he gives an aside too. He's talking to the audience. In 3 months, I ran off to Paris with a ballet dancer. So Donna Laura says, fate is curious. Here you and I are complete strangers, met by chance in this park, discussing the romance of old friends long ago. We have been conversing as if we are old friends. Don Gonzalo says, yes, it is curious, considering the ill-natured way that we met, a prelude to our conversation, with the birds and the crumbs and everything, and how they didn't want to sit next to each other. You scared away the birds, okay? And he goes, yes, I was unreasonable, perhaps. Yes, that was evident. But then she changes her tune and sweetly says, are you coming tomorrow? And he goes, most certainly, if it is a sunny morning. And not only will I not scare away the birds, but I will bring a few crumbs. Donna Laura says, thank you very much. Birds are grateful and repay attention. The birds are always there. You feed them once, they come back, and they hang around with you. It's nice. I wonder where my maid is. Petra, Petra, signaling for her maid, okay? Then Don Gonzalo is looking at Donna Laura, who's signaling to Petra, and he says, with an aside, no, I will not reveal myself. I am grotesque now. Better that she remember the gallant horseman daily passing by her window throwing flowers. So this is what he's thinking. And she's signaling for Petra. Don Laura says, Petra, here she comes, here she comes. Don Gonzalo says, that Juanito, he's playing havoc with all of the nursemaids, okay? And he signals for Juanito to come. So Donna Laura is looking at the back of Don Gonzalo, and she says, okay, an aside, I too am sadly changed. It is better that he remember me as the black-eyed girl tossing flowers as he passed beneath the roses in the garden. Just then, Petra comes in with a bunch of violets. She hands the violets to Donna Laura. Petra, at last, Juanito, you are late. Petra says, the guard gave me these violets for you. How very nice is what Donna Laura says, okay? Thank him for me. And she takes the flowers and she drops a few of the violets, because she's a little shaky, drops a few violets on the ground. So Don Gonzalo, he says, my dear lady, it has been a great honor and a great pleasure. Donna Laura says, it has been a great pleasure for me also. So Don Gonzalo says, goodbye until tomorrow. And Donna Laura says, until tomorrow. Don Gonzalo captures himself and says, if it is sunny. And then Donna Laura says, a sunny morning. Will you go to your bench? Meaning where the three priests are sitting. And Don Gonzalo says, no, I will come to this bench if you do not object. So she says, this bench is at your disposal. Then Don Gonzalo says, and I will surely bring the crumbs. Don Laura says, tomorrow then? Don Gonzalo says, tomorrow. Laura walks towards the right. Don Gonzalo walks towards the left. And then he bends down and picks up the flowers that were dropped, these violets. And Juanito says, what are you doing, senor? Don Gonzalo says, wait. And then Donna Laura, who's walking over this way, sees him picking up the flowers. And he says, she goes, it is he, okay? And Don Gonzalo, who's picking up the flowers, looks over at Laura and said, it is she, no mistake. So they look at each other and they wave at each other. And as they walk away, he says, as he's walking away, it is she and no mistake. They wave at each other, and then Donna Laura says, can it be that this is he? And then Don Gonzalo says, heavens, is it she? The same words from the poet of Campo Amor, when the people could not recognize each other after 20 years. So after 50 years, these people know that this is Laura and this is Don Gonzalo. They smile at each other as if she were at the window and he was below in the rose garden. And they disappear in the arms of their servants. And the curtain comes down on the play. Curtain comes down. So at this point, we have a homework assignment. And the homework assignment is on your book in comprehension number 2. Please look at number 5. Laura and Gonzalo build up stories about themselves so they can, there's 3 choices, A, B, C. A, fool each other. B, forget the past. C, conceal their emotions. So A, they are trying to fool each other. This is part of the comedy, okay? The comedy is they both realize that the other one was Laura and the other one was Don Gonzalo, but they're lying to each other. And they're trying to forget about the loss of their youth. B, forget the past. They remember the past, so that's not the right answer. But A is the right answer, fool each other. And C is conceal their emotions. They're emotional about the loss of their youth and their agility and their good looks. And comprehension number 3, number 2, why do Donna Laura and Don Gonzalo spin fictitious stories about themselves? Because they want to keep up with their old image. She was the silver maid, the most beautiful girl in her area, and he was a gallant horseman, and he wanted to remember that. And he was trying to cover up the embarrassment of being old and having to be helped by a servant. And you can come up with your own reasons to answer this question nicely. Number 3, bring out the feelings of Donna Laura and Don Gonzalo as they leave the park. Is it different from what they felt about each other in the beginning of the play? Of course it's different. At the beginning of the play, they did not recognize each other. They were old, gouty, and wanted to have their own bench. They got together on the same bench. They realized who they were, that they had had such a nice affair, love affair 50 years ago, and that encouraged them. So the 4th one is, what do you think would have happened if they revealed their identity? If they did not lie about themselves, what would have happened? Of course, it would have been a different story. They could have been very sweet. They could have caught up on history. And then the last part is, do you think they know who they are towards the end of the play? Of course they know who they are. They even say, this is Laura, this is Gonzalo. So in English, there's words called collocations. A collocation is a combination of words that are commonly used together. The simplest way of describing collocations is to say they sound just right. Many collocations are there in the English language. A quick shower. Nobody says, I want to take a fast shower. I want to take a quick shower. I want to have a quick meal, not a fast meal. I'm going for fast food. You go to a store, one of these famous places like McDonald's or something, you want fast food, not quick food. But in this story, okay, there is a collocation. Here they are meeting each other after 50 years. So they are making a mess, okay, of the whole situation. They're not doing a mess, they're making a mess. Here they are together. They could be get back together again and really appreciate the years in between. But they're making a mess by not telling the truth. They've started off this new relationship under a lie, okay, not Sathya. And that's not dharmic action. Beauty will never happen out of that. Then the next collocation is, here they will miss an opportunity to be together. Not lose an opportunity, but miss an opportunity. And then one more collocation that the sunny morning drives home to you is broad daylight. Here it is, they're meeting at 11 o'clock. It's broad daylight. They can see the other person, and they can see themselves, okay? Instead of bright daylight, in broad daylight, they are not telling the truth. They miss this opportunity to talk about love and talk about the time that has passed. Om Sai Ram. Please, we'll discuss your homework at the next class. Thank you.